We're talking today with Tom Sibley of Wyoming, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. All right, now, Tom, can you begin with a little bit of background on yourself? To start with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Muskegon, Michigan, May 1945.
All right, and was your father in the service at that time?
No, my father had a couple of kids already. He was working in a factory at the Norge in Muskegon, so I think he was exempt
right, that
for
was
that reason. I had a couple uncles that were in
But he was
in the military.
basically, that was a defense plant, or?
Probably,
Yeah.
and I think most of the plants in Muskegon probably were defense related. Maybe that was the reason. I never talked to him about that, so I'm not exactly sure, but it might have been a combination of having a family
Right.
and working
Right.
in the factory.
Yeah, because there was a lot of defense industries, a lot of heavy machinery getting built, and a lot of things
Yeah.
like that, and
Yep.
they did that. All right. And then did you grow up in Muskegon, or did you move somewhere else?
I grew up in Muskegon, graduated from Muskegon Catholic in 1963, went to Muskegon Community College, and then I got a basketball scholarship and went out to Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff and graduated from there in January of '68.
All right. Now, at that point, did you have an idea of what kind of career you wanted or what you were going to do?
I like to play basketball a lot, but when you have to choose a major, that's the way I operate a little bit. Not these big goals necessarily, but kind of like go around, what do I like, and I kind of flow that way, and that's kind of what happened. I was interested in psychology and sociology and working with kids, and so I majored in psychology and minored in sociology.
All right. And then how long after that did you get your draft notice?
After I graduated, I knew I was going. I mean, I had an exemption because I was in school, so I knew I was going to be drafted. So after I graduated, actually I thought about the Peace Corps. And I applied for the Peace Corps and was actually accepted into the Peace Corps. And I remember I was at school in Flagstaff and I had to make this big decision. The guy from the Peace Corps was talking to me, and I said, well, okay, you can, and I think it was Afghanistan was the place I could have went. We're going to start the training. It was in Colorado or something. You can report, and it was in like a week or two. And I kind of agonized over the decision because that sounded like a positive thing. But on the other hand, I thought, well, I would go to the Peace Corps and I still could be drafted. So I was thinking, boy, that sounds like a long time to be tied up. And so it was a tough decision, but I decided just to not take that opportunity. And then I went home to Muskegon and worked for a few months. There was a high unemployment at the time, worked at the Employment Bureau. And just basically waited until I got my orders to report.
All right. And then when was that?
And that happened in May. I reported down to I think it was Detroit for a physical, and then there was a pretty good sized group from Muskegon were bused down to Fort Knox, Kentucky for basic training.
Okay. Now, before we get there, at this point, how much did you know about the war in Vietnam?
Well, that's the thing. I was a social student and a psych student and the humanities, and in that department, even in a small school like Northern Arizona, there was people in there, and one professor in particular, I remember Byron Fox. He came from Syracuse University, and he was probably, I don't know if he'd want to be called that, but probably an anti-war. His view was the anti-Vietnam War. He didn't come out and say it that way, but he brought out a lot of, his way of teaching was more to bring out information and let you decide what you think you ought to do or what you ought to believe. But I respected him a lot, and so I had a lot of questions about whether Vietnam made any sense or not, even while I was in college. And of course, all the demonstrations in colleges, and even at Northern Arizona, there was a couple of demonstrations. I think there's even a small SDS, Students for Democratic Society. Not much, but I think there was a few people that identified themselves, and they were kind of more of a radical kind of group, and I was more like in the middle maybe, but still had a lot of questions. I remember one time he brought to our class somebody who had come back from Vietnam, and he interviewed him in front of our class. And I don't remember exactly what that person's view was, but it was like, hey, this is a questionable action, what we're doing here. Anyway, there's a lot of questions about it. So I had those in my mind when I was drafted, and that was one of the reasons why it was so difficult for me to decide to let myself get drafted. And I had other opportunity too. When I came home, at that time, if you had a college degree, you could teach, and there was really a shortage of teachers. And I remember somebody at one of the local parochial schools, elementary schools, offered me a teaching job, and that would have gave me a deferment too. But I think at the time I was thinking, well, I don't feel strong enough. I'm ambivalent about it, but I don't feel strong enough to do something just to avoid the draft. I didn't feel like I should do that. So I kind of allowed myself, the way I put it, allowed myself to be drafted. And maybe in the back of my mind I was thinking, well, I have a college degree, you know, maybe I'll get a decent job or whatever, you know. I definitely didn't want to get in the position of killing people. I mean, that was kind of went against. I went to Catholic schools my whole life, and what I learned from there was, you know, that unless you got a very good reason, you don't go out and do that, you know. And those reasons were kind of questionable in this war, you know.
Right. Now, was there any kind of sense of patriotism, or at least a sense that it was your duty as a citizen to go when called?
Somewhat, although at that time, I had friends. I had a friend from Boy Scouts that burned his draft card and just went out to Colorado and worked at a bookstore. You know, he's gone. I had another, probably my best friend from grade school. He applied for a CO, conscientious objector, and he went through this process for years, fighting the draft board about trying to become a CO because, you know, he didn't believe in the war, and he didn't believe, you know, it was based kind of like on what I was saying about your Catholic upbringing and questions about the morality of that. So I had other friends too that questioned the war that weren't being drafted. None of my good friends got drafted, but they all kind of went through this process. So you can talk about that era, and I think that's one characteristic of that era, even though I guess there was a small percentage maybe that actually got drafted and went to Vietnam of guys, but a much bigger group was affected. So in a big way, we're all Vietnam veterans. Maybe that's why even though it seemed like, well, relatively to some of the war, it's a small war, but it impacted that generation big time. And so in a way, my buddies, the guy who went, it was a major part of his life for years, you know. So in a way, he's a Vietnam veteran too, you know, from that experience of our country and of people our age at, you know, in those years. So so I had lots of questions about, you know, and it was more ambivalence and not sure.
All right.
Anyway, I let myself.
Okay, so you go.
Get drafted.
Okay, and then you get down. You get sent off to boot camp in the summer of '68. And where are you?
Right, at Fort Knox. It was basic training. I was, you know, I mentioned I was an athlete. So the physical part was relatively easy. I was like number 2 in our company in the PT physical training. I scored, I think, almost maxed it. I think I remember my score. I think I had a 196, and I think 200 was a max. And so that part I did well at. And I had a college degree. I was just turned 23. Most of the guys were like 19, younger guys. And I didn't know them before. They're from Muskegon. A lot of them in my platoon were from Muskegon, but I didn't know them because they were younger than me. One fella I did know who was a grad, and we kind of bunk mated at the in basic training. So the physical part was okay. They weren't too high into like trying to prepare you for the war directly, you know, as opposed to the next place I went to for training. So it was more of a general PT and basic weapons. I think it was the M14.
And what about just learning Army discipline and regulation?
Yeah, learning Army, and probably trying to sort you out a little bit who you were and where do you go from here. And so I wasn't gung-ho. Matter of fact, when I went into that, the platoon, the DI chose me. Every platoon had like a sergeant who was this kind of would take the orders from the DI and give them to the rest of the troops. And he chose me because I'm a college grad. I was older maybe because I was athletic. But he chose me as a sergeant. But even though I could do the PT and I did what I had to do, my heart wasn't into ordering these guys to get up early, which we did more than the other platoons, to run, stay up beyond the hours to get ready for the inspection the next day. You know, I rebelled a little bit against that, I think, and whereas I would do it, I wasn't into ordering somebody else to do it. So pretty soon I was down to squad leader. And then pretty soon somebody else was the squad leader, and I was one of the, just one of the troopers. So, so I wasn't interested in taking leadership. And I had opportunities for NCO, and they'd ask you if you wanted to do that, but I definitely didn't want to be in a position of leadership. So.
All right. And then how long does the basic training phase last?
I think it was 8 weeks.
Okay.
8 weeks. Then you get your orders.
All right. And then what happens to you then after the 8 weeks of basic?
Then you go to your advanced individual training, and you get your orders. And that was one of the low points of my life when I got my orders, because my orders were infantry training in Fort Polk, Louisiana. And I said, oh no, I literally, I remember calling my mom going down to the phone booth and calling my mom and said, I got my orders. And I think it was the next day I'm going down to Fort Polk, Louisiana. And I was depressed. It was as depressed as maybe I've ever been. You know, and I literally felt like digging a hole, just kind of like escaping from this. You know, what have I got myself into here? You know, so and we're in this bus, and we go into the gates of Fort Polk, and I still remember on both sides of the gates, and I think over the kind of the entrance to the fort is Tigerland, Combat Infantrymen for Vietnam. And I said, oh man, here I am, you know. And we go into the big hall. The new recruits are in here, and it's a big hall just filled with guys. And the commander of the fort is up there, and they show a movie, which is basically a rationalization of why we're over there, to help the people and to fight communism and the domino theory and all this, you know. And man, and you know, it's a kind of a rousing speech, and at the end he said, "You're all going to Vietnam." And most of the guys there, yeah, you know, they're kind of inspired by this speech, and I'm sitting here, wow, what am I doing here? You know, it's not necessarily what I had in mind here, you know, and boy. And so then, and another thing that I remember that was kind of like encouraging in preparing you to go, to do what you're going to do, which is to kill the enemy. And what they told us to do when you go into mess hall, you count off by fives. And what they told us to do, when you count off, you say Kong Killer 1, Sergeant, Kong Killer 2, Sergeant, you know, every time you go into the mess hall. I said, oh. And it wasn't necessarily the other guys. I don't remember having conflict with any of the other guys that I was in training with. You know, we were busy every day. We did our thing together, and that was fine. I don't ever remember having like political arguments and this kind of thing. It wasn't a big thing, but it was kind of like this ambivalence was kind of inside me. The training, like I said, my mental shape might not have been. I went to I remember going to the chaplain and asking, say, hey, I think this is right after I got my orders. I don't think I can kill anybody. You know, what do I have any other options here? You know, I'd give 10 years of service to be. I'm an infantryman. I'm going to be in that position. Well, you know, he listened, and you know, this is what you got to do. You know, it's not like because you don't want to fight, we give you another job. You know, so okay. So, but anyway, so I was in that situation. We were all 11 Bravos at the time. There was a group of us that came from Fort Knox, and I knew those guys now and had a relationship with them, and they came out and said, hey, some of you are going to have a little bit of a different training here on some different weapons, on mortars. You'll be 11 Charlie. 11 Bravo is light weapon infantry. 11 Charlie is a mortars. And so, okay, you are going to be in the mortars. And I was kind of like, oh, shoot, you know, I have to leave some of the guys I knew best and be in this other training regiment a little bit. We did probably most of our training was together, and we did some different weapons training. Of course, we learned how to do the mortars. So that's Tigerland, and I guess it's kind of an infamous place now a little bit. And there's even a movie, Tigerland. You know.
All right. Now, where in Louisiana is Fort Polk?
It's in. Boy, that's a good question. The only town I remember, which is right near it, which is just a little base town, was Leesville. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, might have been around Baton Rouge. I think I remember going to Leesville one time. I mean, it's not like we were out there. Yeah.
I mean, was it kind of swampy area?
Yeah, swampy. It was hot. It was in the middle of summer. It was preparation for Vietnam. They had a little villages, and it was fairly realistic. Mm-hmm.
And were you being trained by people who had already served in Vietnam?
Yeah, most of them were. Most of the cadre were Vietnam veterans, and a lot of those guys I respected. I mean, these guys were career soldiers, and a lot of them were like fair, were consistent, do it themselves. You know, you could respect those guys. I remember seeing some of these guys. Say, "Wow!" And they're physically impressive. Some of them. So yeah, I don't remember having a lot of problems in the training as far as me not doing this or doing that, and I remember respecting some of them.
Yeah. Well, when you went into the mess, I mean, were you just chanting "Kong Killer" like the rest of them?
There's a couple of us that we thought about a bit. I would always say Kong Swiller. You know, I compromised a little bit. I didn't really want to say that, so I wasn't ready to say Kong Killer. So I'd say Kong Swiller.
And they let that go?
I never had I don't think they were. You know, they were told us to do it, but I don't think it was a big issue if somebody had trouble with that, you know.
All right. And then how long does the advanced training last?
It's also about 8 weeks, I think. Right around. They're about the same.
Okay. So what happens to you then when you're done with that?
Well, then you get your orders, and of course, the guy who told us right from the beginning, you're all going to Vietnam, and so I got my orders, you're all going to Vietnam. So I got my orders for Vietnam, and I think we got a 30-day leave. And then in October, we were down at the airport in Muskegon County, and there was a group of us all going to, I think it was Oakland. Where we went to get ready to ship out. And I remember being at that airport with our families, and you know, I'm infantry, so I'm thinking, damn, I might not, there's a good chance I might not be coming back here, at least in the shape I'm in now, you know. So it was really hard. I can't remember this, you know, specifically walking to the airplane from the Muskegon County Airport, because we had to walk, and everybody was hanging around there and said, hey, the plane's leaving, you guys got to go out there. And so I remember I was a little bit older than the other guys. I said, wow. So I kind of remember me being kind of the first one to walk out to the plane, And so we got on the plane and went to Oakland, I'm pretty sure. And that was a big place, I guess, to process you in. I think they gave us all our stuff for Vietnam, like a big bag and things. And then I remember being the night before we go to Vietnam, they had us in some kind of a barracks situation in Oakland. I remember climbing over the fence that night. Tomorrow I was going to Vietnam, and I went to this bar, and I think it was in San Francisco. Somehow I don't remember how I got down there. I said, what are they going to do, send me to Vietnam? I wasn't real intimidated about what could happen to me. And so I want to check this out. So I went down to this bar, and I think it was called Your Father's Mustache, something. It was a sing-along place. And I had kind of had fun in there and met people. I told them, I said, hey, I'm going to Vietnam tomorrow. Nobody believed me, of course, And so then I snuck back on base. It was, I went to an after-hours place, which was kind of strange. It was, I think, an illegal place. Somehow I ended up there. And then I ended up back. It was getting light when I climbed over the fence and got back in my bunk. And the next day I flew it was like a passenger, they contracted passenger planes to fly to Vietnam. So we had our khakis on. We were flying over. It was like we were going on vacation or something, So we talked to some of the guys, and I talked to remember some of the guys, and I remember thinking about, man, I'm in, what's going to happen here, So then we came out, and one of the first impressions I had, when you walk off the airplane and bam, it's hot and muggy. I mean, you get like blasted with, gee, this place is hot. And so we were I think we flew into Long Binh, I believe, and then we were in a replacement company there probably a couple of days or so, and I think we were processed again. And then they told us what division we were going to, what location, and then we flew up. And I had all my gear. I had that duffel bag full of all my gear. And I threw it on that plane. I think it might have been a C-130 or something. And then it flew up and stopped here and left some guys off there, and ended up in Pleiku. And I got off that plane, and my bag was that big bag of all that stuff I'd been carrying around was gone. And they couldn't find it on the plane. Somebody had lifted that. I don't know what happened. But I remember that. And then it was at night. We didn't get there until the evening, and there was a couple guys in the truck. There was several of us, new replacements. They came in on a truck, and a guy had an M16, and another guy was riding shotgun. He had an M16, and a driver, and picked us up, and bam, he drove through. I remember this. My first kind of impression. He drove through this town, right through the middle of town, of this Pleiku. At that time, it was small, pretty small town, but still, there's a lot of people. He didn't care. I mean, everybody just get out of your way. That's my impression. He's honking a horn, beep, 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 and bam, we're going right through Pleiku to get to camaraderie, which was the 4th Infantry base camp. And we get in there, and like I said, it's 8 or 9 at night, and we didn't eat yet, so they took us to the mess hall. And one of my first impressions is we're going into this mess hall, and there's this guy coming in, and it looked like he just came out of the bush. He's dressed up in this, and he wants to get something to eat. And the mess hall guy says, "Hey, you get out of here. You're not getting in." So they have this big argument. I said, "Holy cow, this place is crazy." So I think I'm in a low-grade depression, and I think there's an era of kind of craziness here, So anyway, that was my first impressions. Then I went to the replacement. We were in a little replacement unit, and so we're in these long cots, this barracks like, and the guy I start talking to the guy on my left and the guy on my right. Both those guys, their job was to take care of bodies. They were like morticians.
Mm-hmm.
I said, oh, wow, you know, what? I thought that was, I said, am I getting a message here or what? So, you know, that made me think, but I remember that. But then then I got ordered to my particular battalion, a third of the 12th Infantry Battalion. And also I remember lining up, you know, like a little formation, and the guy said, hey, does anybody here know how to type? And man, in 10th grade I had a typing class, and of course in college I used some of that. So I raised my hand high as I've ever raised it before. You know, I said, yeah, I can type. So okay, he didn't say anything after that. So but anyway, we got shipped off to our unit. I was in the 3rd of the 12th. They were located in outside of Dak To. So we took a truck. I think through to the road went from Pleiku to Kontum and then to Dak To. There's a base there in Dak To, like a little. They had helicopters, and they helicoptered us to this hill. I remember the name. That hill was called 1338. I'm pretty sure. They would name these hills based on its elevation. That was one of the highest hills around there, and that hill was a fairly secure hill. They had been there for a while. There was even some, which was rare at the hills we were at, there was artillery on that hill. So I think that was the battalion commander's hill. You know, I mean, he was there. You know, Topper, you know, the people that ran the show in our battalion were on that hill. But that was the first hill I went to, and then I was introduced to the mortar platoon, because our company was on that hill. And I met, you know, nice guys. And they showed me what to do. And, you know, you come in by yourself, which is the way it was then. You're entering, they got so much time, you start your time. You know? And it's 365 days, people are crossing off the days. But also one of my first memories, there's some beautiful sunsets on that hill. So you're sitting on your bunker and the sun is going down, and man, this place is beautiful. I mean, it was the first sunset I saw there. It really made an impression on me. So there I am then in this company of, I'm a mortar man. When they told me when I went over there, you might be a mortar man, you might be carrying the M16. Depends on what they need, because you're trained on all those things. Well, when I got there, they needed mortars. So I got in the mortar platoon. So my job was more of a support and to support an infantry platoon. Our infantry platoons that went out on ambush patrols and on search and destroy. We call them search and avoid, but search and destroy missions. And because I think at that time body count was kind of the philosophy. You know, see how many you can kill. You know, you're trying to kill a bunch of them, so I guess they give up. But the overall philosophy, I wasn't too aware what the big picture was. Mine was the small picture. I'm with these guys. We've got a job to do. And
all right. Now, what size mortars were you using?
it's 31 millimeter.
Well, that's a little small. I mean, 81?
81.
81.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so,
81.
so it's kind of this standard infantry mortar.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah, the 81 millimeter mortar.
Now, would you go out in the field with the combat units, or did you stay on the base and provide fire support from there?
We would typically operate from a hill, and we would set up our mortars on the hill and run our patrols off the hill. So we did not carry the mortars into the bush. We provided, I think, security for our hill. At night we had what you call it, but you set your mortar so that you could defend your perimeter,
Mm-hmm.
but also you set it so that if you got a call from, you got a squad out there on a mission, that you could support them too. So that's basically what it was. I only remember humping that mortar one time, and that was right before Christmas. And so we, you know, when you're carrying that mortar, and 81's pretty good size, and the base plate, and then you got all your personal stuff. You carry, if you want anything, you got to carry it, you know. I mean, they're not going to, it's not like they're going to carry it and then dump it off and pick it up later. You know, you carry it in your rucksack. And so we humped that, plus some shells. And we walked that thing up, and it was uphill. And it was right before the Christmas, there was a ceasefire at Christmas in '68. There must have been, as I remember that, they told us that there's a ceasefire. So it didn't seem like we were that worried for some reason. Maybe that was why. Maybe they knew where we were, but we walked up this hill in the bush, you know, and it was hot, we were sweating, people were struggling. And we started dropping off parts of that mortar on the side of the trail because we couldn't carry it any further. And I don't remember anybody getting on us about that. We dropped it there. And we walked up to where we were camping, and then we came back and got that stuff, dropped off what we had. That was the only time I remember. We would carry it from the chopper to where we were setting up, but that's not a long.
Now, would
it's not
you
a long walk?
Right. So so normally, what would happen would be you just load up on helicopters and get dropped in a landing zone someplace and just set up there.
Right. Yeah, that was it.
And how commonly did that happen?
It happened quite a bit. If you were at a place a month, I think that was a long time. So yeah, we travel around quite a bit. Sometimes it was short, and there were campaigns, I guess, but I didn't really know, like I said, I really didn't know the big picture. Kind of was told what to do, and then we did that. So.
Okay. So how would you describe sort of daily life while you're out there doing this?
It was probably monotonous somewhat. Daily life was sandbagging. We were busy. It seemed like we were busy. I don't remember being real bored, or, you know, we interacted with the other guys. We were a decent group of guys. We would sandbag and prepare our defenses. Would be basically what we would do. We were digging sandbags and fortifying our hill. So that was our job. Of course, that motivated, and we could improve our living situation too, because we could build a bunker that we could sleep in.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were there at any length of time, we could have a pretty good sized bunker instead of like sleeping underneath. We'd sleep under our poncho liners, you know. And then and it was a little bit cool at night. It got a little bit cool. We had a poncho. I think that was our cover, was a poncho liner. Then we slept outside most of the time.
Now, did the camps come under fire very often?
Not very often. You know, there's a couple times. There was one time, actually, I was waiting to get to where we were camped, and so.
All right, so there were.
It's a little hard to talk about that, but it was.
Would you get attacked with mortar fire or rockets or?
Yeah, mortar. Yeah, they're mortars. But we had air support. And if their mortar came in, the time that I was talking about, well, it was probably 10, 15 minutes later, where I don't know where they came from. We're up, it seemed like nowhere. A couple of jets came flying over, and boom, 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 they dropped their load where we apparently thought that mortar had come from,
mm-hmm.
that mortar fire. And then that was a real morale booster for us. I don't know if the guys who fired mortar are probably gone,
mm-hmm.
or they're down in their bunkers or their holes. But then they would come over. Then they came over our hill, and they kind of like did a spin, And it was just a real morale booster to have that kind of support available to you. And it was pretty quick. And it wasn't long after that, after they had fired their mortar on our hill. So.
Okay. Now, when you were doing the firing, did you get radio communication from somebody? And
we were in contact with that platoon, and they would tell us what was going on, and so we would get some feedback how we're doing. And even then, even though I don't remember any conflict with any of the guys, I remember one time we had a platoon or a squad out there. They said, "Oh, you guys got them," you know. And the other guys were like kind of like cheering. I really didn't cheer. I didn't feel good that we had, you know, killed the enemy. So I couldn't cheer, even though I had no problem doing my job. They're trying to kill me. You know, they're trying to kill my buddies out there. And they having trouble with that, but I couldn't get to the point where I was happy about it. You know, so. So I still carried some of that ambivalence with me, but it didn't seem to affect the duty I had to do.
Right. Now, did the guys that you joined when you came into your unit, did they do a pretty good job of orienting you and letting you know what the job was?
I think so. Very informal. It was just person to person. They did a good job. Taught me what my job would be.
Now, did you get any other kind of sort of training when you got to Vietnam, or they just sent you out to the unit and there you were?
I don't think we got any training. We were in these replacement areas, but only for a couple of days, and I think that was more like processing you, shots, and telling you what to expect. It wasn't training, no. And really had no formal, even when I got to the base camp and played coup, we were again all of us in all these different jobs were in this replacement area, and then we just went to our units, and I think it was up to our battalion if there's going to be any training, and that training was done informally on the hill.
Right. Okay. Now, you mentioned that when you went out there initially, your bag full of stuff got left behind. How much of that stuff did you actually need in the end anyway?
Well, it didn't seem to be a problem. I was worried about it because, gee, I'm responsible for this, you know. And but when I got there, well, I mean, I don't remember anybody making an issue. Okay, we'll issue you what you need here. You know, they had it all there, so it didn't really matter.
Okay. In general, were you pretty well supplied, whether with food, ammunition,
well,
other things?
in general, yes. We had out in the field. We had one hot meal. Usually, we had sea rations. And usually they tried to come in and with a hot meal, a chopper, come in at night, or not night, but you know before evening, and they'd bring in these little buckets, and we had a hot meal, which was shit out of shingle or something like that. I mean, wasn't steak and eggs or anything, but we'd have a hot meal. They tried to do that, so pretty much it seemed to me, as I remember, unless we were moving, if we were set somewhere. Once we got established, they could bring in a hot meal once. Otherwise, it was sea rations. And there was one time, I remember, where we got hungry, where there wasn't enough food. I mean, not even sea rations. And it was interesting because what we did was we talked about food. I mean, that was the big thing on our mind. It was more than anything else. We talked about food. When we went to bed that night, guys were talking about, when I get back to so-and-so, I know where that you can get the best steak. It was kind of interesting. And but I think maybe the next day or so they shipped us some sea rations. Another result of that experience was a group of us, one time we had an opportunity to get some sea rations and kind of store them a little bit. We went and stole a box of sea rations, and to make sure we don't go hungry again. We don't. And we got in a little bit of trouble, but not much for that. Somebody found that out. The other time, water. We were in an area where for some reason we were short of water, so we were getting thirsty, and that was another experience. Must have been a little bit of rain, because we would try to catch the rain, drink the rain, and to put a little bit in our canteen. So we were rationing water for a while. You know, maybe again only a couple of days, but that's all it takes to make a big impression. So I remember that. And it was a supply issue, but that I think only happened once.
But you didn't try getting water out of streams
Well,
or things like that?
Yeah, matter of fact, that's what we did. There was a stream near there, and we sent some people to go there to go to the stream. And I think I wasn't one that went, but I think we got water from the stream. Yeah.
All right. Now, did the unit you were with, did you have medical issues? Were there diseases or trench foot?
We had everybody took
fungal rot?
marijuana pills for marijuana. I don't remember, people getting sick so much. I think, no, I don't remember any real medical issues. I think we all had carried mosquito repellent. They issued us that, and we took these marijuana pills every day, I guess.
Marijuana pills?
I mean, not marijuana.
Malaria.
Not marijuana. Malaria. Excuse
Okay.
me.
Yeah, a little different.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
no pill for marijuana, I don't think. But.
Yeah. I mean, did people bring marijuana out in these places as well? Or?
In our unit, out in, nobody ever asked me to buy any or gave me any or anything like that. I think there was a few people in the platoon and the guys that went out on the patrols and stuff were smoking some marijuana, but it was kind of quiet, and it wasn't real prevalent. And like I said, in my platoon, I don't remember anybody smoking marijuana. In the mortars. It wasn't real prevalent on the hill. I think maybe in the base camp, maybe more. We would get beer at times. We could order. You're on the hill. We could order beer, in pop, and they would ship us some. The chance you're taking, if you got to move, you're going to carry it. So we didn't order much, but at times we could get beer and pop.
Okay. Now, did you spend time sort of in larger camps, or away? I mean, you're talking mostly the experience kind of out in the field and the smaller base camps and so forth.
Right.
Did you have phases where you were in a larger camp or complex for any amount of time and with more amenities?
We had what they called, I think they called it a stand down, where we came out of our area. I don't know if it was a reward, or they made it seem like it was a reward that you guys done this and that, our company. And we all came in trucks, and we were going to be redeployed in another different area and have one of these operations. I think after that they had to plan for that. So we came in the base camp, and they had a band. I mean, there was a actual band playing when we drove in our trucks, and they had a steak dinner. It was in the evening. We didn't get there till like late, and we had steak dinner, and we had beer, and we just partied. And the guys it was like a little out of control. I think our group was out of control, and what I remember hearing is that, hey, we were so much problem there that they sent us out early. They don't want these guys around there. So I remember one night I slept just trying to find my way back to where our barracks was, or where we were sleeping. I slept in the back of a ambulance truck one night because I couldn't find, I didn't know where I was, but I was on this big base camp. So we were probably a little out of control, but that's the time I remember coming back to base camp. And we weren't in there very long, it seemed like to me.
All right. Did you ever get R&R during the time when you were out there?
They'd come out to your hill, and somebody from headquarters, and say, okay, we got this R&R, and if you're there for a certain period of time, you could be eligible for it. And there were some that were more popular than others. And so you came out to the hill, and okay, anybody want Bangkok? Anybody want Hong Kong? Anybody want Taiwan? Australia. You know, you had all these options, and guys would take them, and whoever had the most time in could have first choice. Well, there was one left one time, and it was Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I said, well, I'll take it. I'll go anywhere, anytime, you know, if I can go somewhere now. So I went to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia on R&R, and that's an experience in itself because they fly you. One day you're on your hill. The next day you're on a commercial airplane with a stewardess. What would you like to drink? And then you go into Kuala Lumpur, and you're bussed into town from the airport, and it's anything you want. And I did some touring. I goofed around quite a bit most of the time, but I did some touring. I saw some tourist things in Kuala Lumpur, rubber plantation. They had a pewter. They made real good pewter there, and so I toured the big. There's a big caves, interesting caves, and went to a very interesting circus. The guy he had a bowl of goldfish, and he'd drink that goldfish, and his stomach would come out like that, and then he would gulp it back, all the goldfish back into the. So that impressed me.
Well, while you
little things, these little skills.
Yeah, while you were there, were you in your uniform, or were you wearing civilian
we
clothes?
We were in civvies. Yeah, we bought clothes there cheap, and I think I bought a suit there and sent it home or something. I sent stuff home from there. So yeah, that was our R&R. So I did do that.
Okay. Now, how long did they give you when they send you?
About five days, I think.
Okay.
Something like that.
All right.
About 5 days, then you're back, and it was strange. It was a strange thing. You know, it's culture shock. You know.
Now, how much contact did you have with the Vietnamese people, either military or civilian?
I had very, very little. There were some on base camp. In base camp that did the menial jobs in the base camp. So the times I was in base camp, there was some contact, but in our job, we were on hills. Most of the people in that area that we dealt with were villages of mountain yards. We call them yards. They were like an ethnic group in the hills. There's Vietnamese in like the town of Pleiku and in the towns, but out from the town, which were on the main road, were all villages of other ethnic groups that were aligned with us. I found out later that they pretty much were aligned with the Americans. So we had some contact with them, but you couldn't speak to them, maybe see them, But we were pretty isolated on our hills. And our enemy, and one of my biggest fears when I went over there was I'm going to be in a position where, because you heard stories about soldiers being involved with killing civilians or not knowing who their enemy was and this kind of thing. That was one of my biggest fears, probably the biggest fear when I went over there. What would I do in a situation like that? I see my soldier buddy, killing somebody that's not armed, or torturing somebody, or doing something like that. So never happened. Our enemy was basically the NVA, North Vietnamese Army. So it was like our army kind of against their army. So it was a lot cleaner for me, and I think for our group, there was no question kind of who our enemy was. So I was really very thankful for that. It made it a lot easier for me. Yeah.
Now, did your unit, the mortar platoon itself, did that take losses while you were there? Did people get hit?
Okay, well, not while I was there. Nobody in our, I think I told you I got a little piece of sliver in my back. I still got it because they told me it would go out by itself, get out by itself. of their mortar. So we had no casualties while I was there. Okay, I told you that. When I got into base, when I got assigned to my unit, they asked, who can type?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, if you're in the field for 6 months or more and your company clerk leaves, they choose somebody else to be your company clerk. So our company clerk left, and they were looking somebody in and they would take somebody from, you know, in our company that had been in combat for 6 months or more and made them the company clerk. They made me the company clerk. So I came into base camp and was the company clerk. Okay, so we had guard duty, and once in a while we would go out on some kind of, around the base camp, we went on ambush patrol. And that was, matter of fact, it was the first ambush patrol I was on, was when I was actually in base camp as a company clerk and went out on this ambush patrol, and I was just hoping that nobody come down that trail that night. We were set up on both sides of the trail, just kind of waiting for somebody to walk down that trail. I don't know who, but so anyway, that didn't happen. But so I was a company clerk, and I'd process guys in. I remember this specifically, and I think the guy's name was Willings. I said, "Oh, Willings, he was mortars. He was a good-sized guy." I was talking to him, writing out, I had to process him, do some paperwork, and oh, you're like my replacement. Say hi to this guy, and that guy, and take this up to them, this kind of thing. And so in our about a week later, I think, time is a little bit shaky maybe, but it seemed like real soon later, the hill that I had come from had a sapper attack. And I knew that was an area that they didn't, for some reason, they didn't want us to be there. I mean, I could tell because we had there were some other things that happened while we were on that hill of our platoons that went out on a mission. They got hit, and one of them got hit really bad, and we had to leave some guys. They left. We could see it. We're on the hill. We're in our mortars. We're supporting them. We're listening on the radio, and it's just commotion. I mean, it's just boom. What's going on? Nobody seemed to know. They're just getting hit. We could actually see it, the smoke and stuff from our hill, and hear it. We were that close, and so we supported them with our mortars. But like, it was all day thing, and then at night we were able to get some of the guys out. And this was another one of those moments for me a little bit. That morning, before that patrol went out, there was a Catholic priest that came out, and there was a service. And this is like a movie moment in a way, And I saw kneeling down in this service was this sergeant who I told you I respected some of the guys who I had training in Fort Polk. Mm-hmm. Man, there's old sergeant, I don't remember his name, this big, strong guy. Wow, I didn't know, he's on this hill. Yeah, anyway, this sergeant was in the platoon that went out. And later in the day, they got some of them out, choppered them on their hill, and they're laying on the hill waiting to be medevaced. And I come down there and look at the guys. One of the guys that was hit very serious bad, and he was just kind of laying there. I don't know if he died. I really don't know what happened to him, but he was hit really bad, and they were waiting for a medevac from our hill. And he was laying there, and he was like, his lips were all parched. And so I got some water and gave him some water. I don't think he was conscious. And so I just remember that sergeant being like a man's soldier, a real soldier's soldier. And, anyway, so he, so that particular hill, so get back to the story, I'm in base camp. And so Willings, exactly sure his name. He goes out to that hill. Sapper attack a week later. Willings lost both of his legs, and some of the other guys were killed. We had some KIAs and some WIAs on that Sapper attack. So they actually penetrated our
Your perimeter.
our
Right.
perimeter. Yeah. So, but I was lucky.
Mhm.
I was in base camp as the company clerk at that time.
Okay. Now, how long did you spend then as a company clerk?
Well, not real long, because I had back problems. I was getting back problems consistently, and I went to the med thing, and of course, what are you going to do with a back problem? You give them something to relieve the pain or something. But it started getting worse, and we did a lot of lifting, and so I had and one time I remember in particular, there was we talked about the Vietnamese did the menial work. And there was this little Vietnamese lady in our chow hall there at the company chow hall, trying to lift this big pot of water to make bug juice or make lemonade or whatever they make for drink. And I said, "Oh, I'll help you with that." So I lift that thing, and that it irritated my back again. And after that, so I went in and tried to, and they're thinking, "Oh, you guys trying to get out of here," which wasn't the case, but they don't know, So, but then finally they put me over to what was called the 71st Evac Hospital, which was, I guess our hospital. It's on the other side of Pleiku, so you had to go through town to get there. I remember just going by myself, to the hospital, and they admitted me, and then they kept checking me. Well, they started noticing numbness in my foot. My foot was getting numb, and my leg, I was getting these pains up and down my leg. So, boom, we're shipping you to Japan. Went to Japan and had back right away. The doctor there tested me and said, "We're getting you in right away," because I was getting nerve damage in my leg. And so I had surgery there. I had some contact with the guys, and by then, you've got some relationship a little bit. And I remember when I had an interview, and it happened to be somebody I knew from Muskegon.
Mm-hmm.
Ended up being the guy that interviewed me. And he interviewed me about, "Well, where do you want to go from here?" I says, "Well, can I go back to Vietnam?" He says, "No, you're not going back to Vietnam." So I thought that was kind of funny, because I really didn't want to go back to Vietnam. Now I was a little ambivalent about maybe I ought to go back there, and I know these guys and that guy, and no way you're going back to Vietnam. So I had a physical profile as far as lifting, and so I didn't have that much longer to go. And so they asked me, "Well, where do you want to go?" And I said, "Well, how about I'd go somewhere different? How about the Northeast?" I've never really been to the Northeast, and so they assigned me to Fort Dix, New Jersey. So when I came home, my mom picked me up at the airport. I had some leave time. Yeah. One thing I do remember, which made a big impression on me, well, a couple of things. One was the hospital plane. It was Australian. There was Australian nurses there, and they were strapped in, and you couldn't move. And I had this big backache. "No, you can't. Can I, change my position? I'm strapped into this." Anyway, that made an impression. And then when I was in Japan, we were injured. Guys were on the line, no matter what your injury you were or whatever, kind of laying there. I don't know what we were waiting for. I remember that part. I remember the guy next to me, and I started talking to him. And he was from Cleveland. And he told me an incident that he was involved in. He just processing it, I guess. That his buddies, they were dealing with BC, and some of his guys he knew were killed. They captured a BC, and he told me, and one of the persons they captured was a VC woman, and he told me how they killed her. And it was very graphic, and I didn't say anything, but it was, you know, I was just, again, lucky that I never had myself personally seen or been involved in anything like that. So.
Was he telling you that just to sort of work it out himself, or do you have no idea?
Yeah, it was. He wasn't joking. He was just talking. As I remember, he was just talking about it. Maybe he was just processing that a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah,
He wasn't saying I'm sorry. You know, he wasn't saying that. He was just describing it. And I don't think he was bragging either.
Yeah. All right. Now, so you got to go home for a little bit before you went on to Fort Dix, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't remember much about that or what I did at home.
Okay.
You know. But
What did they have you do at Fort Dix?
when I came into Fort Dix, okay, you're going to be a guard in a stockade. You're infantry, weapon trained, and this and that. And I said, I'm not carrying a weapon. I remember saying, I'm not going to do that. And so I went and I talked to some people, and I must have talked to the right person. I said, okay, you don't have to do that. And I had a psych degree, so they changed my MOS at Fort Dix to a psychological specialist. So what I did was, I still was working in the stockade, but I interviewed these guys that were being ordered into the stockade. And most of them were from New York City, and some real, some pretty rough characters, street characters that got in the Army somehow, and they were in the stockade. And it was kind of infamous a little bit because of the anti-war times. There was demonstrations, I guess, outside of Fort Dix and maybe a lot of the big bases. And there were, I guess, maybe some anti-war people put in a stockade that were resisting while they were in the military. A little bit late, maybe, but so it was so I interviewed guys in the stockade, and then for some reason I was there, and that was fine actually. Good group of guys. I was in a med company. Then they transferred me. I didn't have much to go. They transferred me to Fort Monmouth, which was down the road, which was kind of people told me that was kind of like the country club of the Army. That was kind of a nice base. I was in med company. The food was decent. I played tennis at night. I was on the basketball team at and I was in a clinic as a psych. And I also interviewed people that were in a mental health clinic. And so I interviewed people that came into the clinic, and there's a couple things happened. I probably had a little, was it PTSD? And didn't really realize it probably in a way, because it's everyday life. Because there's a couple things happened. One, which I never have done before. I played basketball for years, and so I was on this basketball team, and some guy came in and gave me an elbow. And I told him, I said, don't do that again. And he bumped me again, and in the middle of the basketball game, I punched him right in the mouth. And that's out of character. I don't do that. And another time, we were talking about something in the mental health with all the staff there, the major, who's the psychiatrist, and captain, who's the social worker, and then us interviewers who are bachelor's degree people. And I started crying right in the middle of this. I couldn't stop. I was very embarrassed, and I don't know exactly what triggered it, but I think it was an indication of, I've never done that before either, and something triggered that. So those two incidents told me, what's going on here? I didn't think much about it at the time, really, but I think probably related to, my mental state at the time.
Sure. Well, you're in a room full of people who were treating people with psychiatric issues. How did they respond to that? Did they just kind of give you a little bit of space?
Yeah, just gave me space. I remember they were really, really good to me. I was near the end of my time in the service, and that's why I'm a E5.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they promoted me to E5 for some reason. I had probably a month to go.
Right.
And I got orders to be an E5. Yeah, they just gave me some space, and I was fine after that.
Okay. Now, when you were in the Army, was there any effort made to get you to re-enlist, or did they just figure you'd leave?
No, I don't remember that. I don't think anybody offered me anything. I think at the time probably it was military was winding down.
Mm-hmm.
I know Vietnam was really winding down, and they started the withdrawal. I think in '69, the end of '69.
Mm-hmm.
Nixon trying to withdraw, and trying to get out of
Right.
it.
Right. So the big demand that was in place at the time that you went in wasn't really there anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you'd gone to the Peace Corps for a couple of years, come back, they probably wouldn't have taken you.
You might be right about that. Yeah. Hindsight, maybe I could have saved Afghanistan.
All right. That's a little bit of a tall order, probably.
Yes.
All right. So you get to the end of your time in the Army then. What did you do when you got out?
I did as little as possible, which might be another indication of my mental state. I grew a beard. I signed up for unemployment in my hometown and went into line, and then I took a trip out east, still getting unemployment benefits, which supported that trip, I guess. Although I stayed at the Y, you know, slept outside, you know, in my car. I mean, I didn't care too much. Then I visited a couple of the guys that I had met in at Fort Dix,
Mm-hmm.
and went down there again. We used to go to New York, talk about support of the troops. In New York City, I could take a bus to New York City pretty easy for a weekend, and we get weekends off quite a bit. And the USO there, New York City, right down Times Square, you go in there and they give you a number when you come in. Come back at 5 or 6, whatever the time was. We'll tell you what event is available. I saw Broadway plays. I saw the Giants play. I saw El Hurt at Carnegie Hall. And I saw the Brooklyn Ballet, and, you know, cultural things that I never would have went to. You know, it was just great. And they had a place you could stay that was cheap. You know, you got no pay.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think when we started, it was what, $90 a month. You know, but at least in New York City there, you know, you could have fun and you didn't need any money. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so that was pretty good.
You're kind of kicking around for a while. I guess another thing you mentioned, sort of the support given to the troops there in New York. Did you experience any of the kind of anti-Vietnam or anti-military stuff when you got back yourself?
No, I had, like I mentioned, my buddies were going through this their own way, and I couldn't come and talk about my experience with them because it was totally different, and they probably didn't talk a whole lot about me, about complaining about not being a CO or whatever, because our experiences were so much different. But I don't remember having conflict about it either. I never resented anybody for not going,
Mm-hmm.
for making that choice. I was happy, and I think Carter, they had this amnesty for those who had resisted.
Mm-hmm.
I was fine with that. I didn't have animosity for people that didn't go. I didn't have animosity to the Vietnamese. That just the opposite, probably, where I have some sympathy for their situation, for being put in a situation that war did, you know, millions of people being killed and injured and, you know, changing their life.
And what about any of the stuff that sometimes people, if they were going around in uniform in certain places in the United States, would get negative responses of different kinds.
I never experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I never went around in my uniform.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was always on a base or something.
Right.
When I went off base, I was in my civvies.
Mm-hmm.
So even when you went to New York, you know, I wasn't. Of course, I had short hair. Maybe that would people might have known
Mm-hmm.
who you were, but I don't remember anybody. As a matter of fact, one time I was flying maybe home for leave or something one time, and I was on a plane and I was sitting in the coach. And the stewardess came up and I had my uniform on. She said, "You come up, and set up in the. There's room in the first
Mm-hmm.
class. So you come up there and said, what do you want to drink?" And you know, so I remember that.
Yeah.
That was a positive.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
All right. Now, what kind of line of work did you go into eventually?
Well, okay, so I'm kind of this guy who's, hey, I don't need to work, you know. This is fine with me. Go out to the beach in Muskegon. But I was in line at the Employment Bureau, and they offered me a job. Because I had worked there for a couple months prior to getting drafted. After I graduated from college, I went back to Muskegon. Our family knew the manager of the Employment Bureau, and he offered me a job for a couple of months because they were really busy at that time. It was in spring of '68. So I worked there for a couple of months as a clerk on the line, and then when I came back, I was in the line, and I said, "Do I have to take this job?" Because I'm not sure I'm ready to work. She said, "Yeah, if you don't take this job, you don't get your unemployment benefit, right?" So, okay, so I started working again. And so then I said, well, maybe I can do more. I have a degree maybe I can get a better job. And so I applied to the Department of Social Services. It was called the Department of Social Services at the time. And I got hired as an eligibility examiner over at the Department of Social Services in Muskegon. And I did interviews of people applying for public assistance. And he had a caseload of 180, and there was paperwork. I said, "Oh boy, this isn't my idea of social work." So I had an opportunity, and I applied for grad school, social work. I still was interested in social work, working with kids, and so I was kind of surprised, but I got accepted at U of M,
Mm-hmm.
and I got a degree in social work, master's degree in social work at U of M. And then when I got out of there, I had a couple job opportunities, and I took the one at the Kent County Juvenile Court as a probation officer. So I worked there for 28 years and then retired from there.
Mm-hmm.
Not that long ago. Not that long ago. So.
All right. If you look back at the time that you spent in the military in general, and maybe the Vietnam chunk of it in particular, what kind of effect do you think that had on you?
That's a good question because you know, I don't know. I'm not sure. I might have went into the Peace Corps. I'm not real sure. I know one thing it's definitely had an effect on it. I started getting involved in the Vietnam issue back in the early 90s again. I mean, I forgot about it for years. Right? I mean, it's, you know, I'd be interested if there's an article or there's a movie about Vietnam and that kind of thing, but I'm not involved. Then I saw in the paper, there's a group doing a Christmas party for the Vietnamese. There's these refugees coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And for the Vietnamese, there's a Vietnam veterans group. And boy, I got my interest. That's pretty cool. So I contacted them. Well, it wasn't our local chapter. It was the one in Monroe County, Michigan. And they were very active in doing things with Vietnamese. And they had come over here to Bethany Christian Services, who was relocating refugees. And they did a big Christmas party for the kids. This is the Vietnam vets.
Right.
I said, wow, that's pretty cool. Then so I joined the VVA, the local chapter, which wasn't really into that type of activity, but it was the national organization I was pretty impressed by. And then somebody from Bethany, I worked in foster care at the juvenile court, came in and one day and I was talking to them about recruiting, and they said, hey, why don't you be what they call it, a parent, in a way, a kind of a parent or a take-in. We're getting this unaccompanied minors, Amerasian kids. I says, I'm single. I got my life, you know, I'm like my freedom, and I said, I don't know about that. So I talked to them some more, and they said, well, we get these older kids where they don't need like mothering or, you know, a whole lot of care. You know, they're pretty independent. So okay, so I'll give it a try. So they placed, he was a little older than 17, but they said he was 17. His actual age, he told me, was more than 17. And he lived with me for a year, and that kind of got me started. I met his friends would come over, other Amerasian kids, and it was all his friends were Vietnamese. And so I started getting involved, and it kind of went from there. I've had other involvements with Vietnamese, including a family that our church sponsored. I asked our church to sponsor a family. These were guys who were refugees through a program which allowed Vietnamese who could prove they were in the re-education camp for 5 years or more. So that group was coming over. I got involved with, they had an organization called the Vietnamese Veterans.
Yeah, they're still up and going, and I'm interviewing them. So,
are you?
yeah.
Okay, great. And so I got involved with a bunch of them. Became friends with some of those guys. They would invite me to their ceremony. They have big ceremonies sometimes, and they would invite me to that. I tried to bring the VVA, my group, their group, and we'd invite some of the leaders of our VVA to their ceremonies and so forth. So I started getting involved, and then in '95 I went back. Saw in the paper they were offering the opportunity for vets to go back with international aid who had been doing some service projects in Vietnam, and they had this idea of bringing a group of veterans back there, involve them in some service projects, and to reconnect with maybe some Vietnamese veterans over there. And so that was quite an experience. That was in '95. And I've traveled back there several times. I got involved with another family through the Vietnamese refugee resettlement program. I got involved with a woman who was in a camp in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, that actually after the '95 trip I visited her in the camp, and her uncle was working for the Reverend Skipper's refugee program here. And so he encouraged me to, I wrote to her, and finally she has come over to USA, and I was a pharmacist in Jackson. So I've gotten involved with, you know, in kind of a lot of different ways. So in that way, to answer your question, yeah, it's definitely affected my life, because I have kind of went with that a little bit.
Yeah, so you kind of learned a lot more about the Vietnamese people themselves sort of after the war was over than while you were there.
Right. Yeah, that for sure, because I had hardly any contact with civilians.
Now, when you went over to Vietnam, what kind of reception did you get, or what kind of interaction did you have with people?
It was with the guys I was serving with, and it was fine. It was positive. I don't remember having conflicts with individual people. There was maybe an out in the field. You know, there's groups, and there was a Black Power movement at the time, and there was a consciousness of that, I think, in there, but not there. There wasn't large groups of minorities in our unit, so whoever was a minority was part of the big group. I mean, I don't think there was enough minorities in our company where all the black guys would hang out and all the white guys hang out and all the Mexican guys hang out here. You know, it wasn't, you couldn't do that probably because there wasn't that many to hang out with. So you had to, everybody kind of hung out together. And in base camp, though, I remember a couple times where people drive by in a truck and, you know, or something like that. There was few, but no, I never experienced any conflict with anybody.
I was actually also asking about when you yourself went back to Vietnam then, the Humanitarian group and so forth.
Fine. No.
Now, did you?
Our experience going back with the civilians there was positive. I think at that time they apparently have the ability to say, let's move on. That was the past. Let's move on. You know, and maybe they have no other choice. You know, but because it was economically the country after that war, after we pulled out, was a big economic gap. So we put money in there, and there was a way of life that fed on the money that was coming in through the war. So when we left, not only did the people who were running the country, you know, have this conflict between the North and the South. And so the people who were administering the South, boom, they're out of a job. And the North tried to come in and administer that. And the communism, and there's a lot of problems. You know, it translated in a lot of economic problems. So the people were trying to find food. So they weren't too worried. So their energies then went into surviving, I think, rather than looking back and saying, damn, those son of a guns, you know. And they also, the American war was part of a much bigger thing that a lot of the older ones had experienced, the French. So we didn't sense that you guys are the bad guys and we don't want you here and want you around here.
Did you get reminders of one kind or another of the war, in the sense of anybody who had, say, fought on the other side talking to you, or being presented with any information about, here's the site of such and such a battle where we beat you? Or
not me, some of the other guys in the group, because we never visited the area that I had been in, and so we went along, basically along the coast on that trip from Hanoi to Hue to Da Nang to Ho Chi Minh City, and there was one very interesting experience one of the guys had. He met somebody who actually was involved in an incident where he had gotten shot. You know, one of the guys on the trip. So that's a good story. And but myself, no, they were interested. Well, you're up in Pleiku, and I met Vietnamese here that had been in Pleiku, you know, but not on that trip.
All right. Now, are there any particular incidents or memories or things that kind of stand out in your mind about the time in Vietnam that tend to come back to you that you haven't mentioned here yet?
Yeah, I can't think of anything right now.
Well, you can after we turn off the camera, but that often happens. But in that case, I'd like to just thank you for coming in and taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right.
Appreciate it, James. Yeah.
That'll do it. Just switch the mics off here. Well, you did that well, and while you don't speak all that loud, the mics are pretty good at picking.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I knew I might get a little teary there. When I talk about that with somebody else, I can think about it about myself, but if I talk to somebody else for some reason,